Seems, can you hear me?
No.
It's on. Hello? Can you hear me now?
No.
Thank you. It seems to me that every time I prepare, I get strangled. But anyway, I want to ask, over the last few years that I've been a member of Company A, I frequently heard this group refer to itself as the intelligentsia of Southern Florida. On Sunday, November 15th of this year, the News of the Week in Review of the Sunday edition of New York Times carried a story on its front page which told me that I have to ask all of the intelligentsia in Company A to think about and comment on this story. The lead of the article, basically this is written for the end of the first decade of the 20th century, which is next week. 21st century, I'm sorry, thank you. The lead of the article called for thinking people like us to jump ahead and start naming the decade just passed. In the same way we named other decades like the Me Decade or the Roaring Twenties, etc. I really felt that this was an apt task for the intelligentsia of South Florida. I think we should spend the next 20 minutes or the time that we have thinking up and sharing names for this closing decade. To start the wheels cranking among the intelligentsia, let me offer you a few of the names that were offered by interviewees for the article in the New York Times. And then I'll give you one that I dreamed up as well. The one was the era of misplaced anxiety, as we considered all the external threats throughout the world and did never consider the internal threats that affected our country. Another was the decade of disruption, starting with the World Center attack at the beginning of the decade and going through the dot-com bubble, Enron, changes in the racial outlook of our country, and changes in the American voting system. A third was the decade when the North went south, when for the first time in recorded history, the southern nations of the world began to flex their muscles. Another was the decade of the unthinkable, from the World Center trade to Enron, to the election of a black president, to the recognition of the financial manipulations of Madoff, the decade of the unthinkable. Another was the rise and fall of the great powers, as we learned that every single country in the world has something to say, and we may have to listen to it. And the last one in the article itself was the nothing happened decade, which was marked by a great number of lost opportunities. And before I throw it open and ask people to stand up and take 30 seconds or 1 minute to come up with a name for this decade, I'm going to give you a title of my own. I called it the decade of the fall of the tiger, whether it was the fall of the United States or the fall of the greatest golfer in the world. It was the decade of the fall of the tiger. I'd like to ask 15 or so of you to think about and stand up and give us your views on what is a proper name among people who have seen 6, 7, 8, 9, and some of you are into the 10th decade of life. What's your name for the decade that just passed? Somebody want to talk? Are you ready?
Yeah, I would call it the era of the bushwhack.